Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the Intelligent Developers Podcast, led by Andre Bueno and Gerard Delane. And today we have a fantastic real estate professional named Rodger Brown. Roger, how's it going, man?
It's great. It's a sunny day in the neighborhood and another good day above ground, as my grandpa used to say.
I hear that. I absolutely hear that. Andre, how's it going, man?
Doing very well. I'm really excited to dig into this story. I've read so much about you. Before we kind of touch on all the highlights, I'd love to hear from you. Like, how did you get started? How did you get into real estate?
Oh, it was an accident, actually. When I graduated college, I was actually thinking about going to graduate school, and I bumped in. I'm from originally from DC, and I came to Boston to go to college. Last year, I was a senior. I volunteered in the career placement office, kind of counseling students on how to write resumes and do interviews and that kind of thing. And one of the last things I did was to participate in setting up a career fair on campus. And while I was doing that, I met a brother from DC who worked for a little company called IBM. And he's from DC. He knew somebody who went to my high school, and he said, "Look, you can go to grad school and end up more in debt than you already are after 2 years, or you can come to work for IBM and we'll pay you to be in a management training program for a couple of years." So that kind of got me into the tech space and the management training and business training, public speaking, and all that good stuff. But after a couple of years of doing that, I realized I didn't see anyone in the chain of command that I wanted to be like, that looked like me. And I didn't really see myself growing up to be a computer salesman. That's the track I was in, or being in a Fortune 500 company, because back in the day that was pretty conservative territory, and I still had an earring and wore my hair long and all that good stuff. And I just said, I can't do this. It wasn't at that time. Um, I think I was 24. I didn't really, I was really more interested in being happy than chasing a dollar. So I went back to, talk to some of my professors at Boston College where I was in school and a couple of deans, kind of trying to figure out what my next move was going to be. And I said, I want to do something creative where I get to see the fruit of my labor, not just, selling someone else's hardware and software. And those conversations led me to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where I met some folks who said, okay, well, that's interesting. Here's what we do in city planning. Why don't you go and check that out? So I went and volunteered in City Hall in the neighborhood planning department in Boston. And while I did that, I did some side gigs and met some other people at MIT. And eventually one of those brothers, who is now like the chief executive officer for economic development of Fairfax County, just outside of DC, a brother named Victor Hoskins, said, you should come to MIT. We can hook you up with a fellowship. Back then, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development had fellowships for people of color to go to MIT in the Urban Studies Department. So that's what I did. And I started studying urban studies, urban planning. As part of that fellowship, I had to volunteer in either a governmental agency or a nonprofit to fulfill my part of the deal. So I volunteered at a nonprofit doing affordable housing development. And that's really how I started in real estate. It was like this nonprofit had a grant and they needed to buy a building and rehab it. So I said, okay, I can do that. They gave me the grant. I had a friend who was teaching a bunch of um, kids of color. They were getting introduced to the medical sciences at Boston Medical Center. And he would teach them during the day. They would do that. And in the afternoons, they would come to me and rehab a building and make some money. So, and from that start, then I got, recruited by another large nonprofit that's now called the Community Builders. And I went there and worked for a couple years, and that was the Odyssey. I started in a nonprofit, got recruited to work for a for-profit developer when I did that for a few years. And then worked for a law firm for a couple years during a downturn, doing workouts for other developers. Got recruited by a large developer to be a partner, which I did for a couple years, and then I went out on my own for like a decade doing um, uh, financial project management for nonprofits and public housing authorities across the country. And one of my nonprofit clients, again, during a financial downturn, ended up hiring me like 20 years ago to come inside. And I had a wife and a small kid and a need to buy rice and beans on a regular basis, which is tough to do when you're a one-man band, going from deal to deal. So I came in-house at Preservation of Affordable Housing, doing one-off deals around the country for them. And then, over the years, became the managing director of real estate. So right now I have kind of 35 developers and construction management professionals based in Boston, Washington, Chicago, North Carolina, and Florida are working for me. And we're transacting deals from Maine to Florida and as far west as Missouri. Over that 25-year period, we've managed to develop and preserve about 13,000 units of affordable housing. We own our own management company. And that's kind of the story in 5 minutes.
Fantastic. So you have a perspective of being on both the private and the public side and the nonprofit side.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the opportunities to develop in communities, with the muscle of a nonprofit? What are some of the benefits of doing it that way?
Well, one of the things that kind of distinguished this nonprofit from early on is that they had some senior executives that were very versed in public policy. And they recognized the importance of being able to get inside the machinery of policy making and to tinker with it to create opportunities for nonprofits to do financial engineering to preserve affordable assets that, without the tinkering, you would never have the ability to compete with for-profit developers who are deep-pocketed and who may not, in fact, have a mission agenda. Back in the day, these days, there are a lot of private sector players who are interested in preserving affordable housing, make that part of their tagline. 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. People were very much interested in, looking to get out from under affordability restrictions wherever possible. And the sense of the housing crisis was very different then. A lot of the focus was on providing opportunities for folks of very limited means, below 30% of AMI. Well, that scarcity of housing has now found its way all the way up to, the middle class. Around DC and New York, you can make $150,000, $200,000 a year, and you have a hard time finding a place to live. So, what that meant for the market is that there's more and more interest from an investment perspective in owning income restricted housing. There's more of a value placed on the annuity that subsidy contracts present. Back in the day, it wasn't necessarily seen that way. So there's a lot more competition for Section 8 projects and governmental assisted projects than there used to be. When we started out, that's all we did was finding assets that were either at risk of loss to the affordable inventory because of bad management and bad ownership, and so they might be lost through obsolescence, or they would be lost because they were in really strong markets, and private and owners would be looking to opt out to go to market. That's essentially all we did for like the first decade, and then we got into neighborhood transformation work, doing much more intensive intervention in communities, and most of those opportunities came to us because we were perceived as being really mission driven, really concerned about long-term affordability. And because of that, we're able to partner with neighborhood organizations, community groups, resident organizations, and public housing authorities to do long-term transformation with a focus on preserving affordability. And I think the perception of us as a nonprofit, that someone that was an organization that had a big balance sheet, that had some expertise, that wasn't interested. We don't ever flip property. We're not merchant builders. And so if you're a resident organization or a community-based nonprofit or a housing authority, and you wanted to have that kind of that kind of tool in your toolkit, then it was easy to reach out to us. And we've had churches reach out to us. We got started in Chicago because of a resident organization, and advocates reached out to us because there was a large community in a pretty troubled project directly adjacent to the University of Chicago that was at risk of being displaced. HUD had actually threatened to abate the Section 8 contract, to give all the residents vouchers and have them move and just knock down the whole project. And the residents didn't want to move. They were in that neighborhood, they'd been there for a long time. And so they literally found us in the phone book and said, "We understand you guys preserve affordable housing. Would you be willing to come to Chicago?" That was in 2009. And since that time, we won, a Choice Neighborhood Grant. We did a $40 million grant in that neighborhood. We started with 500 units. We're now up to over 2,500 units in about 12 different neighborhoods in Chicago. We're doing a very large rehab project 1 block away from the Obama Library right now, 240-unit tower. Extensive rehab, and it was all about preserving affordability in a neighborhood that 10 years ago was suffering from condo fraud and massive disinvestment. And now we went from houses that you could have bought for $50,000 to houses that are on the market now for $800,000. In a decade. It's been head snapping, and that's happening in a lot of communities that we work in. So that was a long-winded answer to your question of why nonprofit, but that's why.
Yeah, it's certain markets like New York and DC, you're almost required to do it. The communities very much want a mission-based party at the table.
Yes.
When there's a big, important project happening in the community. But even in Texas, if you want the affordable housing tax abatement, property tax abatement, you have to have a nonprofit, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, all of those are important points that, if you want to do something important and substantial in communities, this is a path to do that.
Right. And the reality is, and you know this better than I do, access to capital is critical. And unfortunately, now I speak through the lens of a minority development professional. You know, it's easier to get capital as a capitalized nonprofit than it is as a minority developer.
Yes.
There are many more windows. I mean, the windows are restricted. It's still tough, but it's much easier to get that capital as a nonprofit than as a for-profit.
Grant dollars as well, right?
Yeah,
Certain incentives. They specifically want mission-based partners to
correct.
administer it.
Right. So, I mean, part of our mission is not just doing putting roofs over people's heads. I mean, we try to walk the walk too. So, to the greatest
Mhm.
extent possible, we try to partner um, with either community-based nonprofits that are led by people of color or with
Mhm.
for-profit developers that are led by people of color. So, for example, we're doing the pre-development work now on a pretty exciting project in Boston where we put together a team, including a young, um, you know, first generation minority developer who grew up in Boston. He's part of our team now, and we won the rights to redevelop um, a public library. It's a public library site a block from City Hall in Boston, where we're going to be building the core and shell for a 20,000 square foot library and then putting 100 units of affordable housing on top of it. And he's going to
Mhm.
be a partner in that.
I love it. Absolutely fantastic. Um, and I've personally seen a project where when the project needed gap financing in a pinch, um, nonprofits have some additional resources to be able to reach out to. In particular, if there's supportive housing in the building and there's
Yes,
supportive services that are required to be provided,
yes.
uh, nonprofits have access to those supportive services, those programs, the funding, the incentives, whereas for-profit folks don't necessarily have that access.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a tough business. Permanent supportive housing is not for the faint of heart. For
No,
or nonprofit.
but so what we're doing is we actually have a fund that's funding developers who are building a mix of workforce housing and permanent supportive housing that's kind of mixed in there.
Yeah.
Specifically in Los Angeles, I had worked at a public housing authority. Your friend Victor was actually the first person I called for advice for what it's like to work at a government agency and what sort of impact he could have. He pulled together a huge group and was able to bring Amazon to open their second headquarters over in his county.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess I'm curious, for a lot of your projects, are you building them modularly?
Uh, we're not building, most of our projects are not built modularly, right?
Hmm.
We do have a major project going up now. That is a really interesting story. Um, I mentioned before that we partner with housing authorities and resident organizations. So in Somerville, Massachusetts, very close to Tufts University, right down the street, uh, the the housing authority owned a project that was state-funded public housing. Not many jurisdictions have state-funded public housing. Most of it is federal, but in Massachusetts, we have state-funded public housing. I forget, like 40,000 units of it. Now, the operating subsidy is really thin, and we don't, in many cases, don't have access to the federal resources that go to federally subsidized um, public housing. So this site had 200 units on it, was controlled by the local housing authority. The market is extremely strong in Somerville, very close to Cambridge and Medford, and it's just a really strong market area. So the housing authority said, they put it out for bid. We partnered with a for-profit developer, and the
Mhm.
concept, because the market was so strong, we would bifurcate the site. We would sell the private developer a portion of the site to develop. They would pay us for the dirt, we would take the money from that land sale to underwrite the cost of our creation of recreation of public housing on the site, increase the density on the site from about 200 to about 500 units. Along the way, we got jacked up by the trade unions.
Mm.
We're used to, as nonprofits and builders of affordable housing, we're used to operating in an area where we build with prevailing wages because a lot of our funding has that requirement. The private developers didn't have that requirement, right? They have a model that's based on, open shop, merit contracting, market rents, market cost, and that math gave us a land value that they were going to pay us to build our site. When the unions got involved, they basically got the politicians to impose a requirement that the private developers had to pay prevailing wage on that site. The
Mm.
result of that requirement is that the land value went to zero because their cost increased by the amount that they were going to pay us to, I think it was about $16 million for the land. So that deal got squashed. We couldn't go forward because we couldn't get their money. But along the way, they introduced us to a company in the Netherlands. That company in the Netherlands has a modular building solution that they've implemented across the globe, and they wanted to be in the U.S. market. So I sent a couple people to the Netherlands to check out what they were doing. They came over here. They found a couple of major U.S. investors to back them. They built the factory, and they're now building the first of what will hopefully be a number of projects. They're building a 168 unit, 10-story tower using a modular concept that's lightweight concrete and steel. And so they build and finish the boxes in a factory about 40 miles from the site. They put them on a flatbed, and then they truck them to the site and stack them. I think you guys have done something similar in New York, but I don't think it was successful. I think maybe Forest City tried it in Brooklyn. I don't know all the details of it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the case of the project in Brooklyn is a telltale story about the risk of doing prefab. Is they had some leaking issues during construction,
Okay.
which then there was some lawsuit issues and insurance issues. And then ultimately, and I think it's a telltale sign for all of us in New York at least, is once you had to fire that modular company, there aren't any other options.
Right.
Like if you fire the window company, you just call another window company. You fire your elevator equipment company. There's at least a couple of other options. There's not that many prefab modular factories in Brooklyn.
Right.
So Forest City had to like buy the prefab company to like finish the project. Yeah, it's very, very unfortunate. I actually teach this in my public-private class. And Forest City basically didn't make it to the end of the project, basically.
Yeah. Hold on a minute. Let's see if I can do this.
So,
I'm gonna, can you see that?
yes. Oh, nice. That's beautiful.
Yeah, so that's a live picture. It's going
I
up
love
as
it.
so yeah, we're acutely aware of hold on, let me get back to the screen here. We're acutely aware of the dangers.
Yeah.
Uh, I can,
How's uh how's the timing and the pricing difference going modular versus your traditional?
well, I'm building a 13-story conventional mixed income deal in Boston right now.
Hmm.
Using, regular light gate steel construction. This this building is on a per square foot basis about 30% cheaper and will
Hmm.
deliver in about half the time.
Nice. Very impressive.
And hopefully it won't leak.
Yes. I mean, again, like they were kind of trailblazers in it, but
Yeah.
unfortunately in New York, that was a unfortunate outcome.
Right. I kind of feel like we'll get there fits and starts, but
Yes.
building technology has to change. I mean, I heard someone say
Yes.
recently, you could, if you brought a carpenter from 100 years ago and dropped him on a house building site today, he'd know what to do.
Yeah, he could actually be productive. He could
You
lay
could,
brick.
uh, now, imagine taking an auto mechanic from 100 years today and dropping him in a Tesla,
Yeah, not the
right?
same.
We have a ways to go in terms of
Right.
building technology, and it'll take it'll take some fits and starts, some things that will fail. Hopefully, this won't fail. These guys have some big
Right.
back that are putting some money on it because their feeling is in the U.S. we're millions of units short of what we need for housing, and we're also really short of manpower, right?
Also true. Also
So,
true.
So
Roger,
there's
this
got to
is
be a way to square that to square that circle. You know what I mean? We can't make more people. We can kind of train more people if we can get them to go into the trades, but that's tough these days.
Right.
this is very timely because the city of Los Angeles just voted yesterday to rezone for an additional 250,000 units to be delivered in the city from now until 2029. And they did not want to touch single family zoning, which makes up 72% of the land. So very hard to do that with just traditional construction methodology. If you're
Yeah,
not looking at light gauge steel or mass timber or one of these other alternative materials, it's going to be very tough to do all the things that are needed before the World Cup in 2026, the Super Bowl in 2027, and the Olympics and Paralympic Games in 2028.
oh,
So
they're going to need to do something. They have to use some new technology to get it done. There's not that many carpenters in California
correct.
Right.
So you can't draw the line in, you said you only go as far west as Missouri
right now.
for right now. That makes sense. What,
And
well, how do you think you would solve an issue like that? A lot of cities are faced with the challenge of having to do large scale upgrades to their public infrastructure or their public housing projects, and there's not enough subsidy to go around to fill that demand.
That is really tough because it costs money. And, there's not, in order to hit the level of affordability, given what we know about, material cost, labor cost, which aren't going down from, the jump they took during the pandemic. Interest rates are coming back a little bit, but I don't know we're going to see 0% anytime soon. There's not enough depth in the market to be able to cross subsidize the affordability levels you need by going to the market rate. I mean, we're
right.
doing income now, but I'm telling you, I mean, a lot of the private developers that I know, they haven't had starts since 2022 because they can't get the return metrics for their investors. And they're building, they're building to the market. They'll take the market as far as it can go. And
Right.
and rents have gone up what 30-40% since 2019, but costs have gone up faster. So you can't even make it up. There's going to have to be public investment on a massive scale if we're going to get there. Because there's just not that many millionaires that are willing to pay $6 a foot for rent.
So, if you were to think about a big problem like that, and you're giving that advice to your younger self who's staring and seeing the opportunity to be part of the solution, what do you think that conversation would have been like?
Uh, that conversation would be, get equity, my son. Get an equity position. Find the person that's going to give you real equity position and then ride it. Right? I didn't know how to open those doors when I was Gerard's age. Yeah,
Wonderful.
and they're tough to open. I was adjacent to those doors, but
Mhm.
those most when I was coming up, most of those doors were for family members only. And if you weren't a
Mm.
family member, you were a wage earner. They weren't giving up the equity. And if I could give
Got
my
it.
the talk, I would say, get equity however you can find to get ownership.
And let me expand on that question a little bit, Roger. You've have jokingly said to me one time about the importance of health. I believe you're a cyclist.
Yeah.
Uh, at your age now, you know, as a thriving professional, what advice would you give younger self, who isn't necessarily worried about, taking care of himself?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a hard one because, stress is a beast, but you need stress in order to, be in the game, right? And
Hmm. Hmm.
fortunately, a lot of times for, a lot of the people, men of color particularly, the stress takes a really, really big toll. It's insidious, right? So I'd say, you know, to my younger self, you need to really be disciplined, right?
Hmm.
Uh, don't go out at night as much. Watch the alcohol. Get your sleep. As much as
Hmm.
we sleep is an option, or we think of ourselves being heroic by, you know, going, weeks at a time with lack of sleep. I can't say I have to be appropriate. That will kill you. The stress and not having a good diet and I'm fortunate in that I've always loved to be active. I played basketball until I got too old. I ski cross country. Now I cycle because it's painful to run. But having that habit is really critical for a lot of reasons, not just your physical health, but also your mental health.
Hmm.
'Cause it will, the business will wear you out. And it's, when the good news is, yeah, you got equity. The bad news is you got equity. So, right? So you're staying up as one of my mentors told me one time. He was like, Roger, you can either eat well or you can sleep well, right? So you want equity, you want to go in that part of the business, you're going to eat very well, but you're not going to sleep very well. If you want to sleep well, you take your paycheck, you won't eat as well. It might not be filet mignon, it might be ground beef, but you're going to get your 8 hours.
Got it. Got it. Fantastic advice.
That's a choice,
Uh,
right? And it's very individual. Some people can tolerate a lot more stress than others, physically.
yeah, what's funny about that stress thing? You know, A, everybody reacts differently to different stimuli,
Yep.
and B, it's hard to see that on paper.
Right,
It's hard to see how will this person react when they are under duress, when they are
right,
under stress.
right,
Will they be a good teammate?
right,
Will they buckle?
right. Right, right. It's really hard, and I see it. I'm not in your position now, but I'm managing a team of people,
Hmm.
and our pipeline's about 80 deals, and I see people dealing with stress. And you're right. There's a real range of adaptations that people make, and some of it is not, some of the
Not healthy.
not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. So sleep is key.
Sleep is,
Although I got small kids, so sleep is a little bit of a luxury. I get
yeah,
really happy when I get it.
you got to go to bed when they go to bed.
I go to bed when they go to bed.
But
No, but
that means that you may not be going to that Eric Adams fundraiser
this is true as
Man,
well.
and that's the tough thing, right? Because with small kids, you can't turn that's the other thing, right? You can't
Balance.
clock back. It only runs one way. And with kids, it seems like it speeds up. And before you know it, those college
Right.
tuition bills are coming and you're not seeing those kids very much. You just,
Right. Yeah. I saw some article once that said there's no balance. You just got to make tough decisions.
that's right. It's got to figure out what your priorities are
Figure out your priorities and commit.
and
That's
commit.
it. You
There's no
know,
perfect answer.
there's no perfect answer. Your kid's got a sports activity. All right. You have to make a tough decision. You need to do the job thing or say to your employees or your staff, hey, I have to go to this. This is important to me.
Right,
Right. You guys go do that thing. Here's what needs to happen. This thing is priority now.
right,
So just making tough decisions.
right. And as you build your team, you want people on your team that can backstop you that way,
Yes, that's a sign of good leadership.
right? Because it goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we will end it there. Roger, man, thank you so much for coming with us today, man, and having this conversation.
You
We truly
started.
appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you.
Perfect.
That was a great conversation. I feel like we could have gone on forever.
absolutely, we could have.
Fantastic. All right, Roger. Till next time.
Okay,
All
till
right, have
next
a
time.
good weekend, and thank you very much. I very much appreciated the chance to catch up.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Absolutely. Take care.